Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide. I think we're good. So the theme of tonight's workshop is where should new housing go? And we've got a tool that we launched this week that we're going to be using as the core part of the workshop. So don't worry if you've not had a chance to look at it in advance. We're going to show you how to use it and spend time in small groups, having each of you develop a housing plan about where new housing should go, and then having some conversation about what was important to you in making your decisions, and things you'd like to tell us as we actually develop a shared plan, which will become our housing element. So that's the overall agenda. The big thing is the small groups. We'll be spending most of our time in small groups. I'll do a little bit of intro. I know most of you, or many of you, were probably at the workshop we did in July. There might be a little bit of redundancy as I talk about sort of what the housing element is and why we're updating it and what's included in it, but I'll do that fairly quickly, and then we'll get into the balancing act, and then we'll do some group sharing at the end and talk about the next steps going forward. So again, if you've not done it yet, rename yourself on your Zoom screen using the 3 dots up in the right corner of your image, your name, or whatever's showing up for you, if you have your video on or not off, and then use the rename function, and then put in the chat who you are. Okay. And then we're going to do a couple opening polls. Are you going to launch us on that, Victor? Okay, so some questions on the screen there. Go ahead and give us your answer. The first one, you can choose more than one response. And the second question, choose one response. You may need to scroll to see both questions. So if you go ahead and do that, respond to the poll, I just want to quickly introduce our team. I've got Victor. You want to say hi, Victor? And from our Baird and Driscoll Community Planning team, I'm with Baird and Driscoll Community Planning, David Driscoll. Vu Bang is a member of our team, and Paul Penninger, who is doing our Spanish translation this evening. And then we also have Alex from the city. Alex, you want to say hi and do a welcome?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Alex Othon. I'm an associate planner with the City of Pacific Grove. Just wanted to say thank you for joining us all tonight as we discuss the future of housing in Pacific Grove. As you know, we're in the course of a housing element update, and to that end, I think we've got a great workshop planned and an exciting tool for us all to use. That's it for me. I'm going to turn it back over to David.
Great. Thanks, Alex. I know Anastasia, who's the community development director, is going to be eager to hear what happens tonight. She needed to be at the candidates forum that's going on, but we'll be reporting back to her the results of this evening's conversation. So I think hopefully everyone had a chance to complete the poll. Victor, you want to share the results? Okay. So we've got a pretty high level of concern about affordable housing. Second is the interest in community issues and housing in general. And about a third concerned about potential changes or impacts in the neighborhood. And 7% of you are kind of curious, and 10% of you have other things on your mind that brought you here. And if there's things that you'd like to say about why you're here, go ahead and put it in the chat or raise your hand. And then number 2, over a third of you think that reaching our housing needs number is impossible. I appreciate knowing that as we go into this. About half of you think it's doable. 10% think that we need more housing than what our housing need numbers are telling us. And we'll talk about what those housing need numbers are for those of you who are new to this conversation. Okay, I think we've got a hand up. Was that Don Murphy?
Yes, I was just concerned with question number 2. The question asked if we could plan for the number of houses. It didn't ask if we could actually build them.
Okay, well, that's a good point to make. Yeah, tonight's a planning exercise, but the housing element is all about creating the conditions that will actually facilitate the creation of housing units beyond making the plan. But we'll talk about what the housing element is and sort of how affordable housing gets created. I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about why we're here. And I'll just point out that I've illustrated the slides with images of people in Pacific Grove, and I typed in Google images of people in Pacific Grove, and I just dropped them in to remind us of why we're doing this. We're also going to be talking, there's some pictures of housing, talking about housing units and things. It can become quite clinical and talking about densities and things like that. But at the beginning, middle, and end of the day, this is about your community. This is about creating places for people to live, to grow up, have full and fulfilling lives, and grow old and be a part of the community for their lifetimes, if they so choose. So that's why I've put those photos in there just to remind us. The housing element is something that's required part of your general plan, and general plans are required by the state of California for every jurisdiction around the state, cities, towns, counties. Everyone needs to have a general plan, which is basically a statement, a policy document that says, here's how we plan to grow and manage our community over typically a 20-year planning horizon. The housing element is a little bit different in that it's really looking at requirements from the state for specifically the housing element that are different than the rest of the general plan. And we need to demonstrate to the state that we have a plan to achieve our housing need numbers. And I'll talk about what that means. And the state actually reviews the plan and does what's called a certification process. And we, under state law, need to have a certified housing element in order to exercise one of the primary functions of local government, which is land use and zoning and development approval authorities. There's a hand up. I'll call on you briefly if it's about the specifics of what a general plan is. Aki? You need to unmute, sorry. We still can't hear you. Click on the microphone looking button on the bar at the bottom of your screen. Maybe I can help you. Maybe if I click on that. Okay, I'm going to go on, and if you get unmuted, speak up, or you can also type your question in the chat, and we can then respond to it there.
Okay, I just unmuted.
Ah, very good. Okay.
Good. Yeah, the previous housing element plan had objectives for 2013 to 2023, I believe, or 2015 to 2023.
Yep.
Are we still trying to meet those objectives, of which we are didn't come close at all, or do we have new goals?
We're planning for the next period, which is 2023 to 2031. The previous period, well, we're currently in it. We're at the end of the previous planning period. I don't have the slide in this slide deck of those numbers, but we actually overall met the total housing need numbers. We did not meet the number for very low income. So I'm happy to share that with you. I could probably maybe pull it up towards the end of the workshop or send it to you afterwards, but those numbers were much lower than the numbers we have to plan for the next period. And I'll talk a little bit about those in a subsequent slide.
A related question is, I'd like to see that, is that I think we're required to provide annual reviews of the progress to those goals. I've looked everywhere, but I haven't found those annual reports. Do they exist?
They exist, and they're actually, I mean, the easiest place probably to find them is the state data. There's a state database of annual progress reports, APRs. that's on HCD, which is the Department of Housing and Community Development website. And maybe a member of our team could find that link. We can put it in the chat for you to go to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna move on. There's a number of new requirements. So if you're involved in the previous housing element cycle and doing a housing element update 8 years ago, this is a very different update cycle that we're currently in that there's a number of new state laws that we need to respond to. And one of those, there's a whole body actually of what's called affirmatively furthering fair housing. And you'll hear myself and others say AFFH, or just fair housing. And that's about addressing inequity in access and opportunity related to housing. So looking to counter patterns of segregation in how we do our housing planning, making sure we have policies and programs so that people with disabilities, people with lower incomes, people who face discrimination are getting fair access to housing. And there'll be something we're already working on in terms of doing analysis, and also something that's guiding a number of the outreach activities that the city team's been undertaking to hear from folks who face discrimination. There's also a number of new site requirements. Our job as your consultants working with you is to make sure that we're some work to look at where housing could go. We're asking you where your priorities are within those opportunity zones and strategies. But we're going to need to provide evidence that not only is there the theoretical possibility that housing could occur on these sites, but that it's actually market feasible, and that the conditions are in place for housing to happen. And just understand, the city doesn't build housing. Developers, private developers, nonprofit developers build housing, but the city creates the conditions, the set of rules to either make that easier to do or harder to do. And our job in this housing element update is to demonstrate that we have the rules in place to help make these units happen. And I see a comment there. Some cities do their own building of housing. It's folks that have housing authority. Housing authorities do build housing. In Pacific Grove, there's not a housing authority, but there is one development that's owned and operated, was built by nonprofits as senior housing. That's the Vista Point housing by Lovers Point. So also a number of things that have changed is consequences for not having a certified element. There's actually now an accountability unit at the state that is not only going to be looking at what we do in terms of creating our housing element, but then how are we implementing it over time? Are we doing the things that we said we were going to do? We know in this housing element update, we are going to need to rezone, which change the zoning on a number of properties or in a number of areas of the city. And the city is actually in the process of hiring or putting out an RFP to hire a consultant that will do a targeted update to your general plan, land use element, and also do the rezoning to make what we planned for in the housing element actual implementation of it. So these are all slides that I covered in the previous workshop, so I'm going through them fairly quickly. If you have questions, put them in the chat or raise your hand, and I'll ask other members of our team to let me know if there's questions I need to respond to. So how much housing do we need? Where do these numbers come from? So the state has a methodology to project housing needs over the 8-year planning period. That's actually, the methodology is defined in state law. The regional need number is given to, in our case, the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, or AMBAG. And then the AMBAG board, of which Pacific Grove is a participant in AMBAG and has a representative on the board, they develop a methodology to distribute that number, that regional number, to each of the jurisdictions, and each jurisdiction is given a number. Right now we have a draft number. It's not finalized, but we don't expect it to change much, if any. is an allocation of 1,125 total units that we need to plan for, which includes doing programs and things to help facilitate those outcomes. And you can see there the breakout by income category. And those income categories are based on what's called area median income, AMI. So at 50% of AMI, area median income, and below is what's considered very low income. 50 to 80% is low income. 80 to 120% is moderate, and 120% and above is above moderate. And you can see there our largest number is actually in the above moderate category, and our second largest number is in the very low income category, which was the one category that we did not achieve our numbers in the previous or the current, or at the end of the current planning period of 2023. Anything, team, in terms of things in the chat that I need to respond to?
There's a, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Colleen had a question about the AMI range.
So yeah, I'll go back to that slide. So very low income is 50% of area median income and below. Low income is 50 to 80%. Moderate is 100, sorry, I'm reading the number. Moderate is 80 to 100. Is 120% and above. And I just want to highlight there's, okay, I see a hand up. Christy Thomas. If you can unmute and tell us your question.
Sorry about that. So you previously had said that you didn't meet the numbers for very low income. Was that for the last RHNA?
Correct. That was for the last RHNA, which the numbers were quite lower, a lot lower than they are this time.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm just curious, and tell me if I'm getting way ahead here. But if you didn't meet that, and then moving forward, there was no mandate from the city to put any low income in the newer high-end projects that went up, how, you know, or no planning to partner with anybody, how is that going to change? Or is that what?
That's a little bit of what we're going to talk about tonight. We're not going to go into a lot of detail in terms of the different income levels tonight, but there's a number of strategies that are in the tool that you're going to use to come up with your plan, where we could help facilitate the creation of very low and low income housing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll just call out a couple of them. ADUs is one way in which we can create some low income housing.
Okay, don't make me crazy by saying that.
Okay.
You obviously haven't been on the Nextdoor app to see what these things are renting for. So that I have to.
So there's, well, I'll just say quickly on ADUs. I'm not going to go into a rabbit hole on it, but quickly on ADUs, the thing about them is that they actually are, traditionally they were called mother-in-law units.
Yes, I'm very aware.
and a lot of them actually are used as housing for family members and friends at low or no rent. And there's data that was collected statewide, just sort of doing a survey of how ADUs are being used and what they're renting for. So based on that data, the state allows us to count 1/3, or not 1/3, 30% of ADUs as serving low income.
Yeah, well, I don't know where your data is from, but I can tell you right now, I'm on Pine Avenue and a guy is building in his garage a 455 one in his garage, 455 square foot, and is wants to rent it for $2,000. So you can say that ADUs maybe are helping housing, but it's certainly not helping low-end housing. And they're targeting maybe like visiting nurses or something like that that will pay exorbitant.
Right. So I appreciate that. There's quite a variety of ways in which ADUs are used. And then there's the other opportunities. The biggest opportunities we have is related to how potential city-owned or school district-owned properties could be used in partnership with nonprofits. And we actually had a session in the fall to talk about sort of what these partnerships look like and how they've been done in other communities. And that's actually a recording that you can access on the city's housing website. going to go on just because we want to get into the groups where you can come up with your plan. I just want to highlight there, this is just one part of a lot of outreach that the city's been undertaking related to the housing element. I think Angela Gonsalves is here, who's been out on the street and in front of grocery stores and at the farmers market talking to people. A member of our advisory committee, Barbara Meisters, helped to put together 2 workshops at the aquarium to talk to employees there, to hear from workforce. I know the chamber's been a good ally, putting out a survey to folks who work in town through their members. So lots been going on. We last had a live workshop in July, and this time we decided to do it online because we heard from some people who were not comfortable with the live workshop, but trying to provide a variety of ways to hear from you. And so tonight is part of kind of our month-long focus on where should new housing go. We're going to be hearing from you, and you're all going to make your plan, housing plan, and when we go into small groups tonight. And then that balancing act tool that we're going to use tonight is going to be live and available 24/7 through the end of the month. And your neighbors, friends, yourself, you can go back and do another plan, because what we're doing tonight is a contained site that we're using, so we'll be able to know what the meeting outcome was. But if you want to go and create a plan on your own time after tonight, you can do that too. So, theme of where should new housing go? I'm just going to give you into the tool, just so we've been doing analysis, and we've through the Welcome Home initiative that preceded the housing element process, identified a number of areas where new housing could be possible through changes in zoning or changes in regulations. So we've identified 7 kind of areas. One is downtown, and we've identified 3 strategies. And as you go through the tool, you'll find that there's different levels of intensity you can choose from to add different numbers of units. And those numbers are based on our preliminary estimate of potential capacity. So you'll find that some strategies create not a tiny number of units, but not a huge number of units, but everything's important. And then other strategies or other areas create more units. And that's usually because they're larger parcels. So downtown tends to have smaller properties. So even though there might be a number of properties that we develop on any single property, there's not that many units that could be created. And then up in like Forest Hill, there's larger properties where a change in zoning can actually create quite a bit of new housing potential. So just a little bit of background on why those numbers are different. They're not plucked out of thin air. They're based on some preliminary analysis. So there's downtown, there's Central Erdley, there's Lighthouse Avenue west of downtown, where there's existing some higher density housing, and there are some lower density sites that could potentially be redeveloped. There's Forest Hill, which has, as you know, a number of older shopping centers, some, not all of them, but some of them potentially could be redeveloped into mixed use or housing. There's what we're calling close-in neighborhoods, which are walkable to downtown or commercial areas, where we could make some changes that could facilitate more duplexes, townhomes, small apartments. Not a huge number of units that could be created, but some, and in places where people could walk. And then we also have several specific sites that are listed. 2 of them are owned by the school district, the adult school site that's on Lighthouse, and the David Avenue school site. And then there's the Cal-Am site on David, where it's called the David Avenue Reservoir. There's the Pacific Grove Community Center. The idea there is that could potentially be redeveloped with housing and a new community center. And then we put this kind of conceptual idea because it's come up in conversations. We don't have a specific location, but you know, Pacific Grove is blessed with a lot of open space and parks. There's about 340 acres in the city. And the idea is we're putting it out there just to get the feedback, taking 2 acres of that and putting housing on it. And you can say nope, or you can say sure. And we're looking for your feedback on that. And then there's number 7 are in a lot of areas around town where there's opportunities for ADUs or opportunities for lot splits. And then there's the all important number 8, where you can put in additional ideas, things that are on your mind that aren't on that list, and also make other comments. This is the map. It is color coded to, when you get into the tool, you see that the different strategies are colored the same as those. But if you're curious or not sure where some of these things are located, that map will tell you. And then at the bottom of the screen, when you scroll down, you'll see some images just to give you a sense of what are we talking about when we talk about these different density numbers. And I'll just underscore, density is kind of a tricky thing, because if you look at the medium high density here, that's actually the building, the Pullman building downtown. It is not built to 60 to 80 dwellings per acre. It actually has a fairly small number of very large units in it, because right now you don't allow that level of density in your downtown. But that size of a building could be built at that density if it had smaller units in it. But that's just give you a sense. Most of those, except for the last one, are images of buildings in Pacific Grove. And as you go through the tool, you're going to tell us what you think would be appropriate in terms of density in each of these areas as you build your housing plan. I'm now going to play a video, which is part of the Balancing Act tool, so you can go back and look at it, but it's going to walk you through how you're going to build your
working on Pacific Grove's housing element update. I'm here to demo this simple to use Balancing Act tool that we've created so that you can provide us with valuable input by making your own housing plan for the city. At the top of the page is a map of the city that we've developed, which you will refer to as you make decisions for your housing plan. Below the map are 2 columns, the housing needs column to the left and the density allocation column to the right. The total at the bottom of the housing needs column indicates the target number of housing units we need to plan for. This will be your goal. The total number is determined by the regional housing needs allocation, which was set by the state, plus a buffer amount. It's recommended that this buffer be between 15 to 30%. Begin by choosing your buffer amount. The goal of this exercise is to plan for enough housing to meet the city's total housing needs. As you go through this exercise, please pay attention to the meter above. When the meter is red, the number in the circle indicates how many more units you need to reach Pacific Grove's total housing needs. The meter will turn from red to green when you reach the housing needs target. Now it's time to start creating your housing plan. Take a look at the density allocation column. Underneath is a list of areas whose numbers and colors correspond with the map above. Click on any and it'll expand so you can see the potential development strategies for the area. For each strategy, you can choose the level of potential new development you think is best. Estimates of the number of units that could be created are listed in green beside each option. If you have any questions about any of these areas, strategies, or terms, you can click on the information icon for more details. You're welcome to leave a comment with your selection by clicking on the comment icon. There's also a table at the bottom of the page, which gives examples of what different levels of density could look like in Pacific Grove. These areas and strategies were identified for their potential to create new housing capacity based on staff, consultant, and community input. However, if you think we're missing something, then feel free to leave a comment under category 8. Please go through each of the areas and strategies listed and select the level of development capacity or priority that you prefer. Once the housing meter turns green, congrats, you now have a housing plan ready to submit. That's it. Thank you for your participation, and we hope you enjoy the tool.
Okay. So we're going to be going into breakout rooms. Okay, I'll get to your question in just a moment. So we're going to go into breakout rooms where you're going to use the tool. And you're each going to have your own tool to play with and come up with what you think is the appropriate allocation. So take your time, consider trade-offs. The important part of tonight, that's the value of just, instead of just doing it on your own at home, is that we can have some conversation about why you're making the decisions you are. So that's going to be an important part of the breakout, is hearing from each other about how you're making decisions about allocating units in different locations or using different strategies. You'll find the one thing that's different about the tool we're using tonight is as you go through each area, like downtown, it'll say submit category. And if you submit category, it'll give us a running tab of how everybody in the room tonight is allocating units. But we ask that you don't hit submit, the overall submit, the button at the bottom of the screen until the end of your breakout group, just so that you can still access and look at and follow along as you have the group discussion. And Aki, let's hear from you.
Yeah, your tool addresses capacity mainly, and I hope we're not making a recommendation solely based on capacity. There are a lot of other criteria to consider. For example, access to transportation, neighborhood context, costs. So how are these other criteria going to come into play when you make your recommendation?
So that's, well, one, that's going to be part of this conversation you're going to have in your small groups about why you chose one place over another for those exact reasons, kinds of things that you just mentioned. So that's the kind of input we would like to hear tonight. Rebecca.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having this. I had a gathering at my house, and one thing that we came up with was that it's really hard to keep affordable housing affordable when we wanted to know about city-owned properties, the city owning the property and then controlling the rent so that it would reflect like the wages of two people earning a minimum wage. So I wondered if that was okay, if that was part of your breakdown of kinds of housing. And then the other thing is, how are we, like, if we're like, I think that we should have a really positive relationship with the school district, not only for housing, but for the skate park and for pickleball court use on the high school courts and for all kinds of reasons. So I'm really excited that you want to discuss that with them, but without knowing what the outcome of that is, of those discussions are, how do we vote for housing on school property? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Sure. So there's several properties that are included in the mix that are city owned. And as you mentioned, there's a couple school district properties that are publicly owned. And there's a lot of great examples around the state and country of school districts developing housing in partnership with nonprofits and local communities to meet the needs of their staff, teachers, or the broader community. So the surface parking lots downtown, the Pacific Grove Community Center, and those school district sites are great opportunities for partnership with nonprofits to create long-term affordable housing that can meet a whole variety of needs, special housing needs like people with disabilities or seniors or families. So those are in the mix, but they're not called out specifically, but we can talk about them. And I just want to say, I saw a note in the chat about people who are computer challenged. I appreciate that. One of the advantages of tonight in the small group, if you're confused by how to use the tool, we can walk you through that. And if you're just really it's not something you're comfortable with, just have the conversation in the small group about where you think a housing is appropriate so we can capture those in the notes, even if you don't complete a plan. But I think the thing we like about the tool is it sets up this trade-off conversation, because at the end of the day, for us to have a certified element, we need to demonstrate that we're creating capacity for the housing need numbers that have been identified for us. And we'd like your input about where you think those numbers would best be achieved in fulfillment of your vision for the kind of community you want to be. So I'm just going to highlight ground rules as we go into the small groups. I think everyone's going to be very respectful and be listening as much as wanting to say your own opinion. That's why we're here, is to hear from each other and see where we have shared priorities and where we differ from each other. And we'll be capturing those in our notes just so that can help inform. what will eventually be a decision by the Planning Commission and the City Council in terms of what constitutes the draft element that we send to the state for their review and certification. So tonight is about getting input, it's about listening, and about voicing your own perspective as well, and sharing the floor and making sure we're giving everyone a chance to be heard. Aki, I don't know if you still have your hand up from before, or if you put it up again. Okay, Lisa, let's hear from you. And then we'll go into the small groups.
Here we go. Can you hear me?
Yep, great.
Okay. So I tried to get this all figured out in the wee small hours last night. And so there's so many cases where there's so many unknowns. For instance, the David Avenue Reservoir, the idea of developing there. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't have time to run around to all these places and try to see what it's talking about. So is there some chance that the groups that we're in, the person leading the group will actually know the answers for this?
If they don't know the answer, they can document the question.
Okay.
And hopefully we can either answer when we come back to the large group, or we can follow up with an answer.
Okay.
A number of these property, I mean, there's no plan for redeveloping or rezoning the Cal-Am site as an example.
Yeah.
But we want to hear from you whether you think that's even something we should pursue. So tonight's about hearing what your perspective is, where you think it's appropriate. There's a lot of work yet to come to figure out if we can make those things so. To go into groups. I'm gonna share screen. Okay, is everyone back? Are all the rooms accounted for? This is the challenge when I share screen, I can't see anything. So I'm going to just go around and ask each of the groups to give the facilitator or someone from the group to give us a quick summary. We're at 7:42, so we got a little bit of time, but not a lot. And let's hear from, is group 4, we were 4 groups, right, Victor?
Yeah, 5.
Oh, 5, yeah. Paul, did we have a Spanish language group? Is Paul back? They're still talking. Let's hear from group number 4. Who is facilitator for group number 4?
Alyssa and I were co-facilitating group 4, and we prioritized learning how to take some time to learn how to use it, and then also decided that, you know, it's a lot of information for people to see for the first time, and so that they may spend some more time on it.
Yep.
You know, over the next few days, and that they know it's going to be open for a month, correct? They can
Correct.
keep
Yeah, through the end of October. Yep.
Yeah. Alyssa, do you want to add about any key takeaways?
Yeah,
Or-
sure. So I will also add that there was some concern about not being able to submit unless they met that full number quota. And then some areas that folks kind of mentioned prioritizing were building on top of commercial buildings, building in parking lots. Some ideas were brought up around school housing. There was also some feedback on liking the idea of building on school housing, but realizing that a lot of the school housing is close to nature and the butterfly sanctuary, so kind of being mindful of that. And then someone also mentioned building on the golf course because it's a big piece of land, and instead of using water to keep the grass green, it could go to housing folks.
Okay. Great. I'm gonna, if you were in the group and there are things that your facilitator report, feel free to put in the chat, but I'm gonna go to the other groups just so we can keep on schedule. Who was group number 3?
Group number 3, I believe that was me and Vu Bong. So we had a lot of questions come up toward the beginning about the buffer idea. That's, I guess, a little bit more process oriented, but it does have to do with strategy when it comes to selecting sites. And I think it would be worth clarifying as we go through this process, as PG goes through the process as a city, what the implications are for what the buffer represents, because obviously we have a requirement number and then there's a recommended buffer. So distinguishing between that seems to be important.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. Let's hear the rest of your report and then I'll.
Yeah, of course. One thing that also came up was that it doesn't sound like we want to keep surface parking. That was this isn't unanimous feedback, but that was valuable feedback we got from one of our participants. We'd like to see surface parking repurposed for housing development. There was pretty unanimous, it sounded like, agreement that open space should be protected. Parklands and even some of the community areas, the school, the community center should be protected. And of course, community character came up, and keeping PG's character the way that it is. There did seem to be some flexibility there, though, allowing the downtown to retain some of its character while increasing density within a reasonable distance, a walking distance potentially. So increasing density on sites that are within walking distance of all the public amenities, whether it's transportation or jobs. But ideally keeping maybe fewer sites for development in that downtown area, because that's what people seem to associate with the character. And also there seemed to be some comments on, really how likely is it that we are going to get lot splits or redevelopment of areas where there are currently very low density, perhaps single family homes, duplexes, quads like that. Just making sure we go to the most likely to develop sites and getting high density where there's a high probability. I think that probably sums it up pretty well.
Great. Thanks so much. And again, if folks in the group have other comments, please put in the chat. I'm just going to speak really briefly to the buffer. So state law says you need to have adequate capacity in your zoning to accommodate your needs allocation, housing needs allocation for the entire 8-year period. So we'll identify these sites. We need to submit a sites inventory. We need to demonstrate that those are real sites, that they are market feasible for development. And then let's say one of the sites, maybe it's in Forest Hill, we say that we've planned this, we've rezoned it, and it can accommodate 50 units of new housing. And then someone comes in and builds a new shopping center there, and it doesn't include any housing. So unless we've required that it have housing, it may not have housing. And then we have lost a key site as part of our inventory, and maybe we now are insufficient in our inventory to meet our housing needs allocation. We need to go out in the middle of the planning period, maybe 3 years, 4 years from now, and do another rezoning. So the idea of the buffer is to avoid that, make sure we have not just a tight capacity, but we have a little bit of wiggle room if things happen differently. The other issue would be, we thought that that site might have 100 units of housing and it comes in with 20 units of housing. Now we have a deficit of 80 units that we need to figure out where those might go. If we have other sites in the inventory, we can say, yeah, we're still good. We still got a lot of opportunity for that housing to be created. That was not a short explanation, but let's go on to, I think that was group number 3. Let's hear from group number 2.
So I was one of the facilitators for group number 2. I will say it sounds like group number 3 and group number 2 had very similar discussions. We also talked about some intensification of the downtown because it is close to a lot of jobs and transit centers. We also had some comments about keeping housing out of the open space and preserving the open space. There was a bit of a discussion there. I think we had some differing viewpoints on that one. And there was some discussion about inclusionary requirements, and all trying to meet the housing goals and still keep PG with the same character. I don't know if Catherine, if you have anything else you wanted to add?
I think that was a very good summary. We also talked a little bit about the implications on some of the specific sites, specifically the schools, how that would look and feel if housing was introduced. Does that mean the school goes away entirely? I don't think that's the intention. Alex said that that's likely not the intention, but as we work through with the community, we probably should clarify that it's not the intention to take schools out of service so much as to use vacant pieces of those parcels.
Great, thanks. Paul.
Okay, well, group number 5 was the best group.
Of course.
Not that it's a
we put you on it, yeah. Go.
No, I was meant to be doing the Spanish language group, but there was no Spanish speakers. So we had a great discussion. Some of the folks had already taken a look at the tool and created plans previously. Some were looking at it for the very first time. And so we went through and collected people's comments. Like in some of the other groups, there were concerns about quality of life, about making sure that as housing is being planned for and built, that investments are being made in parks and open space and in transportation infrastructure, and that we're taking care of the things that make Pacific Grove such a special place, including importantly the natural environment. Some folks, as they were doing their plans, tended to concentrate new housing in medium to high density development in the downtown area and surrounding neighborhoods, and others spread it more evenly across the city. So there was a variety of strategies, and a bunch of questions came up which we documented, but 2 that I'll just call out real quickly. One is about what the meaning is of underutilized. What do we mean by underutilized, and how are the underutilized sites identified? Was it using some sort of objective, ratio, like a improvement to land value ratio, or was it more subjective? And then the other question that came up was, what about ADUs and junior ADUs and urban lot splits and duplexes, and how many new units might those types of strategies add during the planning period, and can the city rely on those to meet some of its RHNA?
Yeah, great. So I'll just respond quickly to the questions before I forget them. On the second one, in terms of sort of the more infill strategies, you'll see in the numbers, it creates some, but it doesn't create a lot of new development potential, because those go on a 1-by-1 property basis. It's not big properties, so one property redevelopment from a single family home to a triplex creates 2 more units. And in the course of 8 years, we're not going to see hundreds of those happen, but we'd see some if we change the rules and sort of promote that, help facilitate it. And those are just because the numbers are low doesn't mean it's not worth doing, because over time that might create some really great housing choices options that are different than just a single family home and a larger apartment building. That people call that the missing middle housing. And it's actually what you have in your historic development pattern in your close-in neighborhoods. You've got a lot of existing multi-unit buildings that are close in walking distance to downtown and shopping areas. The other question on underutilized sites, I would say that was scientifically subjective analysis. So yeah, we're mostly looking at sort of, you could actually even do redevelopment under the current zoning of these sites. So they're definitely, one example is the Bank of America building downtown. Part of it is surface parking. Another part of it is the building. I think it's a 1-story building. Under the current zoning, you could build a new building there and create additional housing or building square footage, whether it's commercial or housing. So those were the kinds of sites that we were looking at, and they weren't in every area, but they were in some of the areas. I'm going to just briefly, our group number 1, we let's see, talked similar to some of your groups, talked about, how do we approach this, just in mind with, what's our vision for the community, thinking about transportation, thinking about open space, walkability, sort of the things that, and protection of green space. So we're focused on housing, but we want to keep that bigger picture and other factors, transportation, traffic, transit, in mind as we think about where new housing is being located, or we're creating capacity for new housing. Some comments that people found it easier to make the plan than they thought it would be. So that even clicking on just the medium density options on a number of them get you to a plan, or putting the higher density in downtown and Forest Hill gets you to a plan. So talked a little about those trade-offs. Heard some concern about sort of current trends of losing duplexes and smaller units to bigger McMansions, and things we could do through the process to discourage or make that not possible, so that we're retaining the housing we have in addition to creating some of the new housing. And I said we had quite a bit of conversation about opportunities downtown, but then specifically also Forest Hill, in terms of a potentially large number of units, and that could improve some of the shopping areas, create some new retail in addition to new housing above or next to them. Let's see. Let's I can't see everyone's screen. We're going to have one last poll before we go. We got 4 minutes left, and here we go. So there are, again, 2 questions. First one is this evening's workshop on the balancing act tool. You've got 4 responses or 5 responses. You can choose more than one. There's 5 choices. And then question number 2, your response to now when you hear that we need to plan for over 1,100 new housing units, you think that's impossible, think it's doable, think we need more than that, think things that can't be repeated in public. So, go ahead and cast your votes, and we'll share that. I'm just going to use the chance to, while you're doing that, I'm going to talk about what happens next. So the Balancing Act tool will remain live up on the city's website. We'll be doing some more email pushes out to make sure people are aware of that. You can go on, even if you participated and did a plan tonight, you can do a plan and play around with it more after tonight. That'll be live through the end of the month. There's other outreach that's going on, the kind of stuff that I talked about earlier that Angela and others have been doing will be happening. We will be working with the city team to develop a draft element based on the community input and the analysis, all the other required analyses by state law over the next couple months, with the aim of having a public review draft in early 2023. Our aim is to have it in January. That will then trigger a public review period. There will be opportunity for a public hearing at the Planning Commission, at the City Council. And after that, we then have our draft element, which we send to the state. The state has 90 days to look at it and give us their feedback and tell us, yeah, you met all our requirements, or yeah, you met some of them, but not all of them. You need to make some changes. We've built into our schedule time for us to then respond to any feedback and resubmit and still be on target to adopt by December of 2023. And then while we're doing that in 2023, the work is going to be getting underway on the general plan targeted update, which will also then do the rezoning based on what we identify through the housing element work. And let's share the results of the poll. Okay, I want to see the results. So about a third of you said this helped you think differently about where new housing could go. Half of you said it helps you feel that we can achieve our goals. Almost the same percentage said it makes you more concerned about our housing challenges. 13% were confused and 8% were scared. And then let's see. I keep scrolling down. Okay. Now, when you hear that we need to do this many units, 25% of you think that's impossible. More than half you think it's doable. 17% think we need to do even more housing than what the tool is asking for us to do. And then 4% think things that cannot be repeated in public. So I won't ask you to repeat those. Okay, I'm going to close that. And we are at time, and I want to thank you for taking 2 hours of your lives to be with us and give us your thoughts and input. Please encourage others to get on and complete the tool and give us their comments through it. We have a quick evaluation. It won't take you more than a minute to do. Victor, you want to put that and link in the chat, or can people, they can't click on the screen. I just really appreciate it. I know you've got a lot of things you could be doing that don't involve being here with us. And so thank you very much on behalf of the city for giving us your time and input. And that wraps up the workshop. Did we get the link to the evaluation?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.